Welcome back. When we left off, we were on step one of the community engagement model with regards to roommate conflicts. So this is recognizing the opportunity to help, and any time you see or hear a student who may be upset or complaining about roommate relationships, you may see physical or verbal altercations. Of course, if you witness a physical altercation, you're going to call the police. They may tell you this in your connections meetings. Now, you don't know what connections are yet, but we'll be talking about those in Unit 4. Or they may seek outside help or other reasons. The whole point is that you need to be sensitive to potential conflicts. And the reason you want to kind of keep your ear to the ground and look for these things at the slightest sign is because you don't want to wait until they come to you, if possible, because if you do, you're going to see a much bigger conflict than you necessarily would have seen if you'd caught it earlier. A lot of times, by the time they come to you to complain, it's a very significant roommate conflict that takes a lot more work to work through. And again, one way to do this is using your connections meetings you have with each resident to kind of feel these relationships out. Essentially, and again, we will talk about this more in Unit 4, these are one-on-one meetings that you'll be having with all of your students several times throughout the year. The next step is to take action. So once you've recognized that there is a roommate issue or there may potentially be a roommate issue, you need to talk to everyone involved. You have to get everyone's side of the story so you can start piecing together what's really going on. 9 times out of 10, the real deal is somewhere in between what everyone is saying. You need to remain outwardly neutral, even though you are likely to agree with one or the other. The reality is, one roommate is bound to be more right than the other, and you're going to recognize that because you're a well adjusted person. But you cannot show them that. The whole point of roommate conflict mediation, as you will see, is getting them to come to a conclusion, not for you to tell them the solution. Because if that happens, they will not accept it and it will not fix the roommate conflict. If they work together and decide a solution for themselves, the situation is far more likely to be resolved. Once you've engaged the students, you can begin gathering and sharing information that will help resolve the conflict. We will outline the mediation session here, and this will carry over into step 3. Mediation is 9 times out of 10 the best way to tackle the situation. During the mediation session, you will do the following. The first thing is to set ground rules. Do not allow anyone to speak or begin telling you their side of the story before you set ground rules like, we're going to be respectful, we're not going to talk over each other, etc., etc. You may also want to allow the students to set their own ground rules because they're far more likely to abide by them if they do so. You need to ensure them that you're not here to get them in trouble for any violation of policy. You can offer them amnesty for anything that may have happened in the past because it's happened in the past and we haven't seen it occur. The reason you do this is because one of the oldest tricks in the book is for a student to try to tell on another student for any policy violations in the past because they think that will get the other student in trouble and make the other student have to move out. So as a result, we try to remove that quote unquote weapon from their arsenal and tell them, look, I'm not here to get you in trouble for anything you may have done in the past. Now, of course, there are some violations, if they really hurt somebody, if they killed somebody, anything crazy like that, you're going to want to tell them off the front that you are going to have to report. But anything else in terms of minor policy violation, tell them all of that's off the table and we're not talking about that right now. The next thing you're going to want to talk about is remaining neutral. Explain to them that you're not here to take sides, that you're here to remain a neutral party to help them mediate the situation for themselves. You yourself should continue to remain objective throughout. You're not looking to take sides, rather, you're looking to figure out where the issues are, looking at the concerns that may be implicit rather than explicit, and diagnose the problem so that you can guide them to solving the problem themselves. Sometimes a roommate mediation will become heated. The students will yell at each other, curse at each other, or try to talk over each other. If this happens, you will need to separate the students, take one of them outside and hear that person's side of the story first, and then switch out and take the other person outside and hear that person's side of the story. You'll need to make up a reason, and it can be quite arbitrary in whatever you decide for why you choose one first, because they will get upset about that. Well, why are you taking him first? Why can't I go first? So you'll want to say, look, in these situations, I always start with the person on my left, or whoever's last name is alphabetically first, or something like that, just to make it arbitrary. And then take them outside, talk to one, get their side of the story, talk to the other, get their side of the story, and then come back together and see if you can move on from there. While you're completing the mediation session, you're going to want to be initiating the action phase of step 2, which is written documentation. In this situation, documentation is still necessary because this roommate conflict may drag on for some time, and it's good to have written accounts of what's been going on. You'll want to take good notes during the mediation session because that will help you both in the mediation session when you're trying to make sense of the many issues that may be floating around, but also when you write your report later on. The writing of information down will also assist you whenever you have to share this information with your supervisor if you get in a situation where you need help. Remember, just like everything else in your job, if you feel uncomfortable with your safety at any time when you're dealing with a mediation session, you should go seek help from your supervisor immediately. If students become outwardly aggressive towards you or anything like that, you should simply say, okay, for right now, I'm going to end this mediation session. It's clear that we're not getting anywhere, and I'm going to go get someone who can better assist you. But it's rare that you'll ever have to do that. Once you've completed this step, you're going to move on to step 3, which is identifying and addressing needs. At this point, you will have taken in a lot of information by hearing both sides of the story, and you would have written good notes. You'll start to see patterns emerging that suggest the problem to you. This is not the time to say, hey guys, I know what your problem is and this is how you need to fix it. That is absolutely not your role in a roommate mediation. Rather, you're going to follow the following steps. First, you're going to bring everybody back together in a neutral location if you aren't already there. Then you're going to remind the students of your own neutrality. Remind them that you're not taking any sides, you just want to see everyone happy. Then you're going to walk them through what you saw the issues to be. Finally, you're going to have the students, not you, the students, develop an action plan to solve the problem. If they say, well, there's no way we can solve the problem, we just need to move, you need to remind them that there are limited bed spaces available. You may have a time period where you're not able to move them. There may be 0 beds available on campus that one of them can move to. Remember, the mission of residential life is to teach people how to get along with each other in the real world. In the real world, if you've signed a lease with someone in an apartment and you have a roommate spat, you can't just move. They're not going to allow you to break that lease. We need to teach them to mitigate their own problems on their own time. So the goal is to convince them to create an action plan to solve their own problem. Once students fully understand the situation, they are often able to solve the problem on their own. But sometimes you will need to further engage tools and resources, which is the action step of step 3 in the community engagement model, to solve the problem. In this case, your tools are your proper effective communication skills that you can use to resolve the issue, and your conflict management skills. If it is above your head and you need to engage a resource, there are several that you can use. You can use that roommate relationship agreement that hopefully you've got them to fill out at the beginning of the year. Maybe you pull that out and you say, okay, well, this is what you guys agreed to at the beginning of the year, and it seems that you are not abiding by that. Do you want to revise your agreement? Maybe you pull out a fresh one and have them start all over again. You can also look at an outside resource. Maybe you're really struggling with this roommate conflict and it's going to help you to have an RLC or a GRD come sit with you and work through the situation. One example of this is where one or more students may feel that you have a bias during the situation. And an easy way to get around this is to have another RA or supervisor sit in with you so that you can show them that there are different sides of people that are watching and diagnosing what's going on. If all goes well, these tactics should allow you to successfully mediate the roommate conflict and move on towards a state of normalcy, which you will assess by following up, step 4 in the community engagement model. Following up seeks to assess whether the return to normalcy has been achieved. So, in the days after the mediation, you're going to want to frequently visit the room and ask how things are going. Now, I'm not talking about several times a day, but a couple times a week, you might just want to pop in and check on the students. And if it seems to be getting better, you know that you're moving back towards normalcy. Again, those connections meetings that we'll be talking about in Unit 4 are a great opportunity to check on students too. These are one-on-one meetings without the confusion of anyone else being around that you can use to talk to students. You're also going to want to use different ways of staying in contact with these students. Maybe they haven't answered the door when you've knocked, or maybe you just haven't seen them in the time period after the roommate mediation. Shoot them an email, a text, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you want to do to just check on them and see that they're doing well. This doesn't mean that you should substitute those electronic forms of communication for face-to-face. It means that if you cannot do face-to-face for some reason, you'll want to use some other means to check up on them. And in the end, you'll probably want to have another meeting with the individuals to discuss whether things have been going better in the room. This maybe will happen a week, 10 days, 2 weeks after the initial mediation, and just gives you a good litmus test as to whether things are improving. And this brings us to the formal documentation of the situation. Based on everything you've received in follow-up and during the roommate mediation situation, you'll want to formally document this engagement. In this situation, you're going to include making final notes in the situation and submitting reference for future notice for any RAs or staff who may be dealing with these individuals. In an extreme situation, you may find that roommates cannot coexist. You shouldn't make this call. That call will be made with your supervisor. And if that happens and there's beds available, you may decide that a room change is necessary. This should be extremely rare. Remember, the goal of what we do is to educate students, and giving them what they want and letting them move when they're just having a little argument is not a good way of developing today's students. So to reiterate, this path should never be taken first. It should always be an option of last resort. And continuing with written documentation, as you finish up the written documentation, you and your supervisor have to determine whether normalcy has been reestablished. If so, good work. You mediated your roommate conflict and you've done your job very well. You're able to return to normalcy and take a breather. If not, you need to begin the process again. You may find that you solved 1 or 2 problems in the roommate conflict, but problem number 3 cropped up, and it's time to take another lap around the community engagement model to solve that problem. Remember, maintaining normalcy and strong community, particularly with roommates, is a full-time job. While we make this sound easy by just marching around these 4 steps of the community engagement model, you need to keep in mind that getting back to normalcy is very difficult to accomplish in a roommate conflict situation. These can often drag on for several weeks, and you need to be prepared for that and not just jump to that, oh my God, my roommates need to move. That's not the optimal situation, remember. Time may be needed. It may just take some time for this action plan that you developed with your residents to take effect. And lastly, anytime you run into a brick wall or you're just really struggling with a roommate conflict, you need to talk to your supervisor to help establish normalcy. You shouldn't be the final call to decide whether students need to move or not. All of this said, you were hired because you have a talent for speaking to people and helping them by resolving their problems. If you employ these steps and your given talents, I have no doubt that you will be able to effectively mediate most of the roommate conflicts you come in contact with. So this ends our training on roommate conflict for the online portion of training. You will receive some assistance with this when you are at campus, and you will always have your supervisors there beside you throughout the year to assist in the moment. Today we identified group development traits, and we described the steps to effectively address roommate conflicts. This concludes resident assistant training for roommate conflict, and it also concludes Unit 2 in resident assistant training. Thank you and have a nice day, and you can pick up with Unit 3 next week.